Hey, Central City Church, Joe Graves here, one of the pastors. And before we get into our talk today, we are going to spend some time in Genesis here in a little bit. Before we do, I wanted to just open up a conversation. One of the things that we've tried to talk about as a church, even before recent events, is things regarding racism, diversity, systemic racism. And I've had the chance after some of the recent events, Brayden and I had a chance to reach out and we've had some conversations, and in those conversations we both kind of felt it might be good just to have some of that, a taste of that conversation with you all. And so today I want to talk about faith, I want to talk about race, I want to talk about Black Lives Matter in church, and I'm going to ask Braden to share some of his thoughts and experiences, and we can just kind of enter into a conversation that's guided by humility and a real sincere desire to not only love one another, but to be people who want to figure out what justice looks like, what it means to walk with God, and to pursue justice in our current times. Why don't we start, just to lay the foundation of our conversation? Why don't you talk a little bit about your faith story, Brayden? How did you come to know Christ? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me come in and talk about these things. I'm really excited to be a part of this. But growing up, I went to church every once in a while. Didn't really mean a ton to me. I believed in God, and the relationship aspect didn't have any importance. I didn't really see a need for it unless you had a dire need in your life. Fast forward to early college, where all these worldly things I had my identity in were crumbling and stripped away, and realized I had this huge gaping hole and felt very lost. Who am I without these things? And that was when I met a group of people that just loved me so well and showed me what that relationship with Christ looks like and how to run alongside of people and sharing their faith with me eventually led to me dedicating my life to Christ.
And you would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but knowing you, like that identity you have in Christ is your anchor. You know, like that's everything kind of spins out from that. So we are going to talk about race today, and
Mm-hmm.
the next question I want to ask you is, what's the story of you coming to understand your racial identity? But even that, we start with the faith question, because I know for you and for me, it's that person of Jesus Christ
Mm-hmm.
who's changed our lives. So, but tell us what's the story of you kind of coming to an understanding of your racial identity?
Yeah. So for those that don't know, I'm biracial. So my mom is black, my dad is white, and I'm Brayden. Growing up, I didn't think much of it beyond that. I mean, my mom's side of the family was black, and my dad's side was white. And when you're young, you really don't think too much about it. And I grew up in a super small country town, and I was very ignorant to the hate that is in the world with that. And it wasn't until growing up where I almost had an insecurity of needing to pick a side or needing to justify who I was. Where if I was in a situation where I wasn't around my mom's side who was black or my dad's side who knew me, that I would have to explain how I was black and look for their approval. And I felt that way within the black community too when I was in college and part of a scholarship group that was all diverse students. And I stand up and introduce myself and want that acceptance and want them to see me as one of their own and not just this weird outlier.
I heard you say once, or maybe you shared it with me in a text, but I can't defend, I shouldn't defend, I can't defend something I can't change.
Mm-hmm.
And that really struck me. You are you, and your parents are your parents, and there's no changing that. And I think there's that pushes me to a place of, no, I accept Brayden for Brayden. Your experiences are unique. They're obviously different than other people's, regardless of whether they're white or black. And I want to accept that. And I think we as a church want to be a place that we let people be an expert of their own experience. Like what it's like to be you in your unique world. So tell me, just from your experience, your perspective, have you experienced racism or microaggressions, is a term I've heard? Have you experienced that in your life?
Mhm. Yeah, so like I said, when I was younger, I didn't really pay attention to it. But then it wasn't until high school I actually dated a girl for a couple years, and she was white. Her family was white, and I would say out of the couple years we were together, the first half of that, her dad wouldn't speak to me. We would pass shoulder to shoulder at basketball games, track meets. It didn't matter. He had zero interest in getting to know me as Brayden because he saw that barrier that was my skin color. He knew I came from a diverse family, and instantly that was sort of a write off for me. And racism is sort of like cuts to the body. You have these huge gashes where there's blatant racism like that, but then these microaggressions almost serve as paper cuts. They don't look that painful, but anyone who's experienced a paper cut knows that sometimes they sting more than the bigger cuts. So microaggressions in high school was I was one of the few people in my friend group to really go away to college, and I got a good amount of scholarships, not only through OU but through our high school. But to my white friends, it was very easy for them to say, "You only got those because you're black." Like, it's not that I worked hard or was in the library or seeking out these scholarships. It was, "Oh, these were your handouts for your background."
Yeah, and that kind of sits with you. That's those micro cuts, those microaggressions that maybe the person saying it doesn't think anything of it. And if I'm honest, I've been guilty of that. Like I've said that to a close friend of mine who got a scholarship because they were part Native American. I don't remember if we talked
Mm-hmm.
about this, but so hearing your story is very convicting for me because I was raised in a family that was anti anything that sounded or smelled like affirmative action. So any sort of special treatment because of your background, I was raised to not only be against it, but to speak against it. Somehow I picked that up. And so, that's convicting. So thanks for sharing. To tell me about your feelings about uh, Black Lives Matter. What's your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, so obviously there's been a huge reignition of the Black Lives Matter movement. And as heartbreaking as all the recent events are, I am honestly encouraged that it's happening right now where society is absent of distractions. I think if this were to be happening at almost any other point of, say, 2019, it's very easy to distract ourselves as a society, going out to dinner, hanging out with friends, turning on any sporting event. But right now, the words of justice are just ringing even louder because there's nothing to fill that gap right now. So I've been very encouraged with all the protests that have been going on throughout the states, and especially here in the community of Grandview.
It makes me wonder if God isn't using and I don't carefully say this, but that sense of like there is so much space in our lives right now. I heard someone say that protests are so well attended because of the flexibility of working at home or not working at all, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense that God might be using that in a kind of an interesting way. Now, for some though, for some Christians, Black Lives Matter as a statement or as a cause is controversial. My uh, Facebook feed is increasingly not filled with those statements because I unfollow people very quickly these days. I just don't have time. But I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I just like Facebook's entertainment, so I unfollow people pretty quickly. But there is this conversation amongst especially white Christians around the Black Lives Matter movement and like whether it shouldn't be like all lives matter, et cetera. What are your thoughts? What is your response to the fact that not all Christians are supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, this is a question that I feel like I wrestle with every single day, and I try to do it without bitterness. I think it's so easy for me to, yeah, look at my social media feed and not instantly have these harsh feelings or words for those people. So Black Lives Matter is a statement in itself that is completely void of political affiliation or comparison. So this controversy that people are experiencing, that's self-implied. It's Black Lives Matter, period. There is no, they're better than anyone else, they're less than anyone else. Only if you vote one side or the other, that's where they matter. It's Black lives do simply matter, and it shouldn't be that hard of a statement to stand behind. I think speaking to Christians specifically, it's it's very convicting that so many find controversy in that. As Christians, we are called to live a life like Christ. How Jesus lived here on earth, that's how we should try our best to reflect our daily lives. And we do that by looking at scripture. I think you could maybe pick any page in the Bible and see that Jesus or God has gone out of their way to make a group feel included or help someone realize that they matter. So I looked at, I think it's Ephesians 2:14, and this is just a paraphrase, but Jesus dying on the cross brought unity to two people that had bad blood and bad history together. His death on the cross broke down this wall of divisiveness. So, as Christians, I really want you to reflect on, are you opposing movements that's only adding bricks to this wall? Or are you going to stand behind a movement that will help tear this down and help you see the other side?
So for you, the Black Lives Matter as a statement, as a proclamation, is a way to tear down those walls.
Exactly.
The way you feel it, it's a way of lifting up a group of people that have experienced. Well, I mean, we don't have to get into the history of America. We're all fairly familiar, but experienced an immense amount of injustice.
Yes.
In a variety of ways over a couple hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
Given that, in your opinion, how is the church? And by the church, I mean probably more specifically the American church. So not just our church, but and not just church in general, because this is what we're discussing is sort of the American experience. But the American church, how has the American church failed in this area as far as you see it?
Mm-hmm. So I think with these hard topics, I see a lot of times the American church is shying away from addressing these topics head on. And in communities, especially smaller communities like Grandview or my hometown or your hometown, the church serves as this beacon of truth. So if the church isn't going to address these hard topics, then why should I address it in my household? They're not talking about it. I don't see a need to talk about it. And there's no growth or anything that happens. I think, in my honest opinion, in doing this, a church tries to maintain that safe place where they don't want to offend people. But I think the church should serve as that safe place where these conversations can be had, and you shouldn't feel shame to change your stance or to gain this new information and enlighten yourself on what's going on from someone else's perspective. But in answering that question, one thing that I love about Central is that you guys don't shy away from these topics. I mean, I'll be honest, when you first said that you were going to discuss racism and Black Lives Matter, I was like, I cannot wait to hear what people say about this. So I just asking you as a pastor of Central, why do you find it important to address these really tough topics that people stand divided on?
Well, the fact that we're online is the benefit of that is I have no one can talk to me about how they feel about what I've said. But like I think back, and I think back all the way to when we were at the theater. We did our first headline series, and we did another one this year. And one of the headlines that year, which is kind of the series where we try to deal with current events that are hard to talk about, elicited a sermon on Black Lives Matter. And I know of at least one family that left because of that sermon, and there might have been others as well that sort of left indirectly to that. So it's for a pastor, it's scary to bring up anything that's divisive. I care a lot about how things are said. I care a lot about whether people want to be a part of our community, and that's the type of thing that worries me. But when we started the church, like, we made a commitment to hard conversations. And as a pastor, I don't even have to study the history of America to recognize that systemic racism is an important topic. I know it from the fact that still today, and Martin Luther is attributed to saying this first, but still today, Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour of the week. And there are more diverse churches today than there ever have been in America, but there still are not very many. And there is even few churches that are made up of multiple people that are multiple people groups or identities that are Black led. And so I don't have the numbers, but the statistics are sobering. And so for me, that's a reality that I think it could be easy to brush under the rug and pretend like, and I think sometimes I live that way. I think that's one of the benefits of being a white pastor in a good church is we're predominantly white, and I could just kind of like, and probably many times I just kind of live and I just okay with that. But for me, I can't just ignore that. There's enough of a push to saying like that's not what the kingdom of God should be, and trying to figure out how to address that or how to change that in our context is there isn't an easy solution. We've talked about this, but I definitely think it's not something that we can just simply ignore. So let me ask you, what should the church be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you sort of touched on it, but speaking about diversity is actually seeking it out. I know it's very easy for churches such as Central, for example, being in a predominantly white area, diversity can be hard and it's a barrier. It's not an excuse, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a barrier.
Yeah.
So, actually doing the groundwork to seek out diversity because faith without works is dead. So, we can pray and pray and pray that all these Black families or Latino families are going to move to Grandview and make our church diverse, or we can invite these people and have these conversations like you and I, where you are bringing in people of color to share their perspective. And that can be one of the only ways that the congregation might have that interaction, but at least it's taking that step to them having that interaction and can open up their eyes to how a person of color could possibly decipher the gospel slightly different than them.
So you, as we've engaged in a variety of ways, there was a Black Lives Matter. It was in white silence, actually, is the title. March down Grandview Avenue. We're also helping host and lead a couple of conversations local to Grandview, which you live in the Grandview area, regarding racial justice, naming and wrestling with the fact that there's so many um, uh, um, 95% white, and that was by accident, right? Mm-hmm. There's a history there. So you've been a part of a Zoom call. You were part of the march. What are your thoughts on about participating in that and your hopes for the future?
Yeah, so like you said, my wife and I, we took part in the march through Grandview Avenue. That was more and white silence, and then took part of the Zoom call that was bringing together a group of people that want to end the like racist structures that you see within our community. And that was super encouraging for me to take part of because ever since I moved to Grandview, it's very easy to notice and recognize that there is a lack of diversity. And I was very surprised with how many white people actually were hurt by that and wanted to change that. I don't know, maybe that was just part of my ignorance too, of thinking that, oh, well, they're all okay with it. Like things won't really change. But then after seeing the march, I remember just being emotional, seeing the passion behind everybody and just being able to be a part of this portion of history that's going on. I'm excited for what the group will turn into. I think I shared in the group call that I don't want this to end as a group of empathizers. The last thing we need is just a bunch of white people feeling bad about themselves and feeling bad about people of color. But we need those people to use their influence to bring about these changes that will actually impact my kids, my grandkids, the future of the community of color within Grandview.
You reminded me of something that somebody said to me, and I couldn't even tell you who said it because of a variety of conversations I've been in. But it was somebody who lives in the area and who's white, and they said, it doesn't matter how you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's embarrassing living in an all-white community, and I think that you don't want to operate out of a place of embarrassment or shame. We talked about that in the teaching last week, but that is a product of, I think, a change in times. There is a subset of people like myself that really want to be. We don't know how to do it. we don't we don't necessarily know how to do it well. We're probably going to say the wrong thing. Just for the record, he had to reword some of my questions because they were worded the wrong way. So like that's where I'm at, but there's a real desire. It's like, no, I don't want to raise my children or live my life in a white bubble. I want to experience other people's perspectives and other cultures. So thanks for sharing yours. And if you are friends with Brayden and you have his cell phone number, I'm not going to give it out, but if you already have it right now, send him a text message. Thank him for sharing, encourage him that way. That's in place of normally I'd have everyone applause, but yeah, the guy's here, Ken. Thanks for sharing, but also text
Yeah.
him and thanks so much. All right.